Hi guys, this is Daniel, and I'm doing a re-record of the week 3 SEO content, which I originally gave live on the Zoom call, so that to make sure that we have everything that you need to know here in one video to really reach the top of Google and the top of search engines with the content that you're writing. Now, in the process of this 19-week protocol, we're working in multiple angles at the same time. Right? We're building up your authority as an expert. We're getting you ready to sell a product, putting a product together. And at the same time, we're writing a blog and the $10,000 website. Now, what really sets a profitable website apart from every other website is its ability to rank, right? This website is an engine for new clients, for new potential sales that come to you looking for information that you can end up winning over. And this saves you tons of money on your marketing budget. This saves you tons of time, and it gives you powerful opportunity to research what people are actually interested in, right? Because if you are getting traffic on it, it means somebody typed it into their browser or typed it into Google or asked their phone, and they found you because they wanted to know about that content. So tons of businesses are out there making products for people that don't exist, or topics that fix problems that people don't know that they have or aren't interested in paying for. So doing this right really puts you on the right foot to get started making an incredible profit from the work that we're doing here. Now, unfortunately, there is a lot to it, and also there isn't much room for second and third place. Right? Going from the first result on Google to the second or third result in Google can have to decrease nearly to 10% of what you would get if you were the first. And if you're not on the first page, so you're not one of the first 10 results, then your website might as well not even exist. So that's why it's worth taking the time to get this stuff right, because just doing a little better than anybody else out there on that particular search term can give you huge results, but just doing it slightly not good enough, you won't see any traffic, or you will have difficulty getting the clients that know that you know are out there and that you know you can help. So the first of all, and this is a excerpt from the members area, so you have this in there, and I've updated it since the live version a little bit to make it even better. So you're going to want to have this out printed or looking at it when you're writing until you can internalize and get it down. And I've split it off into the first, or into two main sections. So we've got the outline of what every article should be as far as first thing, second thing, third thing, and then more information on making your content highly linkable. So to start out, I'm going to show you an example of a post of my own, and this post has actually been extremely profitable for me. It's been on the top of Google or near the top of Google for over a year now, and it's driven tens of thousands, if not close to 100,000 people to my website, just this article alone. And I followed pretty much the same exact format that I recommend for you guys here. I've added a little since I wrote this to improve it even still, but this has most of the key elements. So the first thing I recommend is writing a relatively short first paragraph. So this paragraph should be around 250 to 300 characters, and it needs to cover a few key points. One is it should cover exactly what the article is going to be about. Right? It should have a very succinct summary of this is what you're going to get if you click here. Next, it should specify what authority you have. And so when I say authority, I don't mean, okay, I went to school for this, or I have a doctorate or something, or I've got a professional certificate. It doesn't have to be that kind of authority, right? Authority could be, well, I was just looking this up and I put some data together, and now I know stuff that an average person wouldn't. Or I just went and bought one. I just went and did this myself. Right, and this is actually something that search engines look for, and Google in particular, especially if you're in like the health-related fields or psychology-related fields. Google only wants to show people blogs or websites and articles written by people that have some form of authority. And in their guideline, they say, okay, obviously, if you're a medical doctor that works in that field, then you have authority. But people who are survivors say, like as a cancer survivor, you're an authority on surviving cancer or what it's like to have cancer. So just you being in a place or having served certain kind of clients makes you an authority, which gives you the right to be on the top of, not necessarily the right, but it's what these search engines want to put on and show people. And it gives people reading confidence that you're not just some person who threw together something on the internet. So always have that in there. And lastly, it's it's a good technique, and you don't necessarily have to always use this, but to try to write something in there that makes them interested to read on. And so the reason why I put all this together in the first paragraph is, one, on other places in your blog, like let me go to here, say, you'll see that depending on your theme, you will have the first paragraph shown in different listings. So this may be the only thing that people read. Also in RSS feeds, oftentimes that's the only part that's delivered, as well as if this gets posted to Facebook or other social media sites, they, and even search engines, if you look at a search result, say here, you'll see there's a chunk of text there, and this could be from anywhere in it. Google is now picking what they feel is relevant. But if they don't know exactly what's the perfect thing, they'll pull the first paragraph usually. So the first paragraph may be the only thing that anybody read, or that somebody would read before clicking in, and so it needs to be good. And that's why it needs to be around 250 to 300 characters, because most social media, Google search and all that, they won't show much more than that. So you can't have a long paragraph there. So here's an example of one that I wrote, and this isn't necessarily perfect, but I think it's a good example of what to do. So I wrote, today I was wondering exactly what state is the best to live off grid. So I stated exactly that's what this article is about. What's the best state? So I went out and did a bunch of research on 12 key factors that make this state great for living. All right, so that's my authority. I did research. Maybe it could be a little better stated there. And then it also gives them more information about what's in here. So it's not just my opinion. I have looked into 12 factors. So this really sets it out above the other ones that are on the search result, because most websites just have a list and some pictures. And then here's the intrigue. You may be surprised what states came out on top. Okay, so that is the first paragraph. And I know it sounds like a lot now, but once you get used to it, you can just whip these out real quick. And like I said, they shouldn't be long. So practicing this will make you very good at just naturally writing content that people want to read. The other thing we have to think about when considering stuff that people are going to see before they click in is the post image. Now on Google search, most search engines, they're not going to show you the image, but on social media, so let's say somebody posted this on Facebook, the image is actually going to be much larger than the text. Same thing on especially places like Pinterest, where sometimes you'll only see the image. Now, I don't think that it's worth spending a ton of time on an image, but there's two good qualities that you would choose when choosing an image. One is it should be intriguing. So there should be something a little interesting or off about the image that when people see it, they're like, what? Those kind of images get really good clicks. And when we get to the ad part of this course, way near the end, we're going to go into that a lot more in detail. But if you just see an image and it's just kind of striking to you, that's probably, and relevant to the topic, of course, that's probably the right one to use. Otherwise, think about aspirationally what somebody would want to have when they're looking this up, because people are drawn by the possibility of what could be there. So let's say you're having somebody deal with trauma, then the natural thing that people tend to choose is just somebody that looks traumatized. But that's not always the image you'd want to use. Let's say instead you could use an image where somebody's visually overcoming the trauma, like they're stepping over, or they're walking away from a bad situation. Those actually tend to do better. So for instance, in this one, it's just a picture of a cabin in the woods, but this is what people who are researching this are thinking about. They want a nice quiet place out in the country, and they're not sure how to deal with it, so I showed them a picture of that. Next thing is the second paragraph. So this paragraph needs to be a direct as possible answer to the question theoretically, and we talked a lot more about question and search intent in week 2, so if you're not sure about what that means exactly, you might want to review that lesson. But whatever the intent of the person searching this, the information they're trying to find, should be put as directly as possible into that paragraph. Now obviously a lot of stuff that we're writing about, you can't just you're not going to get a complete answer in a paragraph, right? So you're just going to summarize it essentially in that paragraph. And the paragraph, for the same reasons, because Google will show this in certain places, it should be in a format of 250 to 300 characters. And I'll show you exactly why that matters when we get to the answer target segment, because this is basically going to be an answer target. But the reason why we're putting this here, so for instance in mine, This I didn't actually write as a paragraph. I made it a list, which is also another option. That's another type of answer target, but I'll just read mine. What's the best states to live off grid? So I've teed up what the thing is, the answer. Now, if I were to rewrite this, I would recommend saying, okay, the 10 best states the 10 best states to live off grid are, and then I said the states came out of a comprehensive study for off grid states, and then I just list them right here. So they don't have to scroll through the rest of this long article to find any more information. They know that here's the list. And the reason why we do this is because one of the top factors that Google and most search engines use to determine if a website is worth putting high on the list is user interaction. So Google will keep track of people when they leave, they click on a link, and how long it takes them to come back, whether they scroll down and stuff like that. So by giving people the answer right away, well, I guess I should mention also, it's not only if they come back, but it's more importantly if they come back and search for the same thing or click on other links. So we want to make sure that when somebody gets here, they have found the stuff they want and they go on to search something else, or they just turn off their computer, turn off the phone, or whatever. That indicates to Google that this is a highly valuable article. This is giving people the answer they want, and it should go near the top. So that's why this has to be right away. And you could even consider, like, this is, a different color. It's pretty obvious to see. You might want to bold the text. You want to make sure that people's eyes are drawn to that text and they read it right away. And imagine also that if you're on a phone, so if I narrow this in, on a phone it would look more like this. So if you have a big chunks of text, it might push it down to where they can't see. So this is where they're going to come on the phone. This is roughly what they're going to see when they first load the page. So they see the picture, the title, the intro, and then a little bit of the answer. And if they scroll down just a little bit, they see it. So that's why it needs to be right near the top, as obvious as possible. And another thing to consider when writing an answer target is you always actually want to start out with the answer, not with "it depends." And I know as a writer, I constantly have to battle that urge. And I think a lot of us in this group are academically minded or very careful thinkers. And so our initial reaction to any kind of answer is, well, obviously it depends on the circumstances. But what you want to do when you write these is invert it, because people don't want to start out with uncertainty. What you want to do, and so let's say your natural tendency is it depends on dang, 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 but most people, the X is the answer, right? You want to invert that to say, the best way to deal with this is X, but it depends on, and then list the factors, right? That usually gets you to around 250, 300 words. And it's a great lead into the next section, because you actually want people to read this. If they click on your article, get the answer, and go right away, it really hasn't built up your brand. It hasn't built up your reputation with the person who's reading it, right? So it doesn't really fill our goals as much. I mean, I guess it's good that we help somebody. But as we know, most of the time with the information we're talking about, they really didn't get the full answer. So if we end it with, here are the things you need to consider if you actually want to know if this is the right for you. And then we move on to the third paragraph. So the whole point of the third paragraph, and this should be relatively short too, just a couple sentences, is to motivate people to keep reading. So I wrote here, you may wonder how I came with this list and what makes these states perfect for off-grid living. Below, I detail exactly how I made the list and all the details of my research on all 50 states, so you can see why your state of choice did or did not make the list. So a little bit of intrigue there again. Of course, everybody reading this particular article is thinking, well, why isn't my favorite state, or why isn't the state I live in now on this list? So it gives people incentive to scroll down through all the information and find, one, they're going to see a bunch of other stuff, which we'll get into why I included it. So hopefully in all these points will stop them and make them look at more information. Or if they just scroll the way to the bottom, the full answer, the full list is down here, right? So that's one thing that you could potentially do as well, is mention that you have a more comprehensive resource in the third paragraph. So let's say you're teaching somebody how to do meditation, say, as an example. You might give them like a 2-sentence, 3-sentence description in the second paragraph, and then you say the rest of the article is about reading, or the rest of the article is about how you would do it, right? Because that's what you're writing about, how to do this meditation. And then you could say, well, I've got a free PDF, or I have a longer list of instructions that you can print off on a single sheet or something like that at the bottom, so make sure you go down there. So now we're actually getting people to scroll down. We're giving Google great signals, and we're actually getting somebody on board with what we're doing. So now we're going to go back to this list, and we're going to look at the rest of the article. So honestly, first, second, third paragraph picture, that's the whole point of that, is to get people in and on board reading the article. Now we're going to talk about ways that we can increase the likelihood that we're going to be shown on Google in the myriad of different ways that they show searches now. So I pulled up a few examples here. So one, here's a search, narcissistic mother-in-law. This is a topic that I write about on another one of my blogs. Now, if you notice, it's not just the normal search results, and Google is doing this more and more. They're including things like images. They're including this, what's called a snippet. They include people also ask, and if you click in these, there's also more snippets in there. And then finally, the results. So, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the difference between being on the top of a Google search result and being the second down here, especially with all this other stuff in the way, could mean you get less than half, maybe even less than a third of what you would have been if you're in this spot. So, in the body of the text, we're going to encourage Google as much as possible to choose us for this spot. So how do we do that? Well, we do it by writing specific areas in our article that are primed to be what Google likes. And how do we know what Google likes? Well, if you do 100 searches and you look at all the snippets and look what they're choosing, even just clicking here, you'll notice there's certain patterns that emerge. So for instance, if we look at the length of this one, right, 263 characters. If we look at the length of this one, 311 characters, right? And that holds true. Google, on most of the time, prefers answers that are around 250 to 300 characters long. It doesn't like to show shorter ones. It doesn't like to show longer ones. Or if it is longer, it'll just cut it off. So as we're writing, we want to keep this stuff in mind. And so the first thing I recommend that you do is, one, have a context-independent heading. Context-independent heading means that in the article, and let me pull up my own here, the subheading, so these are H2s, should make sense in isolation, as if nobody had read the article and the rest of the article. So for instance, how I found the best states for off-grid living, that makes sense independent of the title. I could have wrote here how I did it, right? That would make total sense to somebody who read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, but it doesn't make sense to people not in the article, right? And then here again, I have another heading. I could have just wrote best stats or my best states or my top 10 or something like that, but I wrote 10 best states to live off-grid, right? So this includes keywords, so that's a good thing, and that's something that Dave talked about in the first segment of this, in his video there. Another example, states with the lowest property taxes and cost of living, right? Works completely independently. I could have just said low cost, something like that, right? That doesn't work as well with Google, because if we go to the search results here, these titles always used to be historically the title of the page or the article. So that would have historically been back here at the top, best states to live off-grid, all 50 states ranked. Nowadays, Google is moving to a new system to where they will search, or they will let the search results go to a subheading. So back to an example down here, like states with lowest property taxes and cost of living. So by writing them separately like this, Google is much more likely to, or writing them independently, Google is much more likely to choose yours, because on a search result, if you typed in lowest, states with lowest property taxes, would you want the answer to be lowest cost? No, you'd want you would click on a title that shows that that is an answer to your question specifically. And so instead of just writing the answer to one search or trying to get one search, best states, right? With all these headings, and this is a fairly long article, longer than we are requesting from people to write during this course, but even in your 500 words segment, you can get 2 or 3 subheadings like this, which could all rank number 1 on different searches. So, this is what this course is really about, because we want to maximize everybody's time and optimize the amount of benefit that you're getting from the work that you're doing. So every article you write from here on out should not just be an answer to one specific search or one specific type of information. As much as possible, it should be an answer to 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we're multiplying our output by using roughly the same amount of time. Maybe it takes a little longer initially to get it up to this level of quality. But trust me, once you do this, and by the end of this 90-day blog writing challenge portion, you will be so adept at this that you're just naturally going to write blog posts that rank well. Whereas people spend the same amount of time writing blog posts that don't rank well, yours will have all of these little hooks and proper formatting details so that you could rank on 5 or 6 different searches, getting traffic from all of those, while other people's articles are not being read by anybody but their friends and family. Right, so that is the content independent heading. Now, under each one of these headings, again, just like the first paragraph, we want to have some form of an answer target. And where these answer targets go, as I showed before, is potentially at the top here. So this is what you would call a paragraph answer target because it's a paragraph. Or it could be a list like this one. So I'm going to describe how to format your articles or portions of your article so that they could potentially be chosen here. And if they do, they'll bring the maximum amount of return to your website. So the first one, answer paragraph target, I've talked about this before in context of the first paragraph. So the second paragraph in the article should be a paragraph target for the whole article. Then if you have any subheadings that are independent answers to a potentially separate but related question, like states with lowest property taxes, states with the most available water. These are all things that I used in my example article. These should have answer targets themselves. Now, a few things I haven't mentioned about paragraph answer targets is, one, the length, but also the tone. The tone should be a little more formal, a little more encyclopedic. And the example I like to show people of this, besides the stuff I've written and other students of ours who've really got this, is actually Wikipedia. If you look at the first paragraph of most Wikipedia articles, they've been whittled down and they're very dense in terms of information. They're very concise and very factual. And there's no wheedle words, any of that stuff, right? You don't have much room in these to make it work. And just if you click through and read the kind of stuff that gets answered here, like the type of stuff that Google chooses, they tend to choose stuff that have a little more of an academic, a little more formal of a tone. So I don't recommend that tone for your whole article. I think most articles should be written in kind of a familiar, friendly tone, like you're somebody that they know, or like a friendly professional that you can come in and just answer a quick question that they have. You don't want to make it an academic research paper, but specifically for these answer paragraphs that come right after a heading or come as a second paragraph of the overall article, that should have the tone that Google likes to pick. And again, direct. So the same thing as in the second paragraph. You don't want to start with, well, it depends, right? You want to start with, the answer is this, usually, but then these factors affect why it would be. Also, you want to make sure you answer the question itself. So imagine you're trying to write an article or a section of article that says, what's the recommended meditation for beginners, or what's a good meditation for beginners? You wouldn't want to say, well, insight meditation is very popular. That's a type of response that I've seen a lot and that I myself have tried to wean myself from doing, because we're not really answering directly the question, right? They asked, what's the best kind of meditation for beginners? Whereas my answer was, well, many people like this. So it'd be better to write the answer as, the best meditation for beginners is insight meditation because it's very popular. There's many teachers out there that can use it. It's simple to get started, that kind of stuff. So you can use the popularity as a way of proving why it's a good meditation, but you wouldn't want to start by answering that because it can throw off the Google bots and it can make people not like it as much because they might read the very first little bit. So much of the internet now is just people skimming stuff. And if they don't see right up front that that's the answer, you're likely to lose them. The other type of answer target that is very popular or is very useful, if you rank all the different type of answer targets, and there's way more than this, these two are by far the most commonly selected by Google. So I'm just going to go over list type and paragraph type because they are a high return type of situation. Maybe later on in the course we might go over some of the less common ones like tables. But for list types, a list is just a list. So I pulled up, let me see here, this one. So search how to pack for a hike, and Google pulled this snippet out of somebody's blog or somebody's website, REI in this case, and they just cut out the detailed, or not detailed, but the outline of what their answer is, and put it here. So if we actually look in the article itself, like they've got a list here, and then they go over all the rest of the stuff, right? But there's never just exactly what they wrote here. Google figured it out. And so the way that we make our articles likely to be selected for this is to have a list that Google can pull out. And there's two ways to do that. One is to have them in the headings, like H2s, H3s. So let's say your whole article is on, the steps to do this, or the 10 best of this, right? You want to make sure that all the headings in it are the items of the list that you would want Google to choose. Now, if you're writing an answer target for like a subheading, you could use, if the subheading's in H2, you could use H3s for that, or you could just put a bullet list directly in your text, if that's appropriate to what you're writing about. Also, I recommend that before you have a list, you have a lead-in. So like for this one, I put a bullet list as my answer target at the top instead of a paragraph answer target, and I said, what are the best states to live off-grid? These are the 10 steps that came out best in a comprehensive 12-factor survey. So that primes the search engines to know exactly what this list is. All right, so I always do that right before I put a sentence or two that just says, this list is blank. And as style-wise, I tend to put a colon here. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. But having that lead-in makes it much more likely that the computer pattern matching system that they have finds this and identifies what it is correctly. Another option is you could just put a subheading here right before it. If your heading or subheading is exactly what this list is, and the list is the next thing, then it's also likely to get picked up, and you don't necessarily have to have a lead-in sentence if you don't want to. Doesn't hurt to have both, though. Yeah, and then lastly, for list items, it's important that you choose the right number. So if we look at what Google chose here, right, they will only show 8 items at most. And in fact, statistically, Google tends to prefer lists that have 8 or more items, right? If there's a 4-item list for this, they're going to want the one with 8. That's just how it is. But more than that, if your list has exactly 8 items, you just get your link here in the headline or the title of your article, and that's it. But if you have 9 or more, right, you get this link to the article again that says more items. And so more items is the difference between people seeing it here and thinking, okay, I got the answer, or reading it and then saying, oh wait, I need to click in and figure out what else there is to it. So that's why when you're doing a list, if at all possible, and now don't make up stuff that's irrelevant, but if you can, try to make it 9 or more items, because you get the more items and it will significantly increase the amount of traffic that goes to your blog even after you get #1 ranked. So if you have a list of steps to do something, oftentimes if you're not coming up with enough naturally, it makes sense to split up one step into 2 independent steps. That's generally what I have to do, right? So if you're talking about how to brush your teeth, you might initially write down, get toothbrush, wash it off with water, put toothpaste on, brush, clean it off. That might be 5 or 6. But if you're running out of ideas, then you could put in, step 3, make sure you select the right toothpaste. Step 5, make sure that you have the right toothbrush. So by adding that more information in there, it makes it fairly easy to reasonably, without just making up random stuff, pad out a list that length. Now, if you're doing top whatever, just make the list top 9 or top 10. That's very common, and it works for a reason. Or more. I mean, you could do top 15 if you really felt like you needed to cover that much in the article. That's another thing with the length of these articles. You don't really want to limit yourself to 500 words. That's the minimum that we're shooting for with the challenge. But if you need more words to adequately cover the topic you've chosen to write about, then you should add more words. Now, what happens if you're not 100% sure what you should be writing about, or there's so much to write about? What should you choose from? Well, it's a very good practice to answer that people also ask questions. So if we go down to here, right, if you scroll down a little bit, it says, well, for some reason, there it is. People also ask, right? So most search results have this, not all of them do. And when you first get to it, it'll look like this. So when you're planning what subheadings you're going to have in your blog article, it makes sense to try to choose ones that answer these questions directly. Because one, you know that people are searching this. Google doesn't make these up themselves. These come from search queries that people have. So instead of answering a question that nobody's looking for, even though it's a good answer, it's better to answer questions that people are looking for because you know people are going to see it, right? And that's one of the reasons why we have the answer targets right below the subheading. So when you answer one of these, then Google will look at that and go, oh, look, that's obviously an answer and it fits the format I like, so why not put it there? Another thing you can look at is related searches. So if there's a search that's related to what you're writing about, these are stuff that people want the direct answer for. And so by having a subheading that matches that with an answer target, it makes it likely that if they search the more in-depth one, right, because what happens usually with searches like this is somebody types in or talks to their phone and says, narcissistic mother-in-law, and it didn't give them the results that they wanted. So then they'll add a longer one, right? So now you have the opportunity for your subheading to rank right here at the top. So these last 3 bullets of this subsection are tips to make your blog more likely to come near the top just because of the quality of it. One quick and easy thing is to bold and italicize key information, unique statistics that you have, short takeaways. Just having bold text makes it more easy to read. For instance, if you're on a phone, and phones can even be narrow in this, it's easy for a relatively short paragraph on a computer to take up a full screen. So I haven't done a ton of bolding in this article, but all my newer ones have much more. I'll usually bold every couple, paragraphs or two of key information so that people skimming it'll catch their eye. It'll differentiate the big blocks of text from each other. And also, along the same lines, having lists in there where appropriate is great. Having subheadings, having tables, and images. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. It's just stuff to break up the page so it's easier for people to read and skim through. Nobody wants to get to a blog or an article and scroll down a page and a half and just see endless text on their screen with no differentiation. It's just too hard to read, and it's not fun, and people just tend to click back when they see that. Okay, so these two linking related items are super important for getting your page up on the rankings beyond everything else that we talked about. One of the other key factors, and this is actually the thing that Google first started using, is an algorithm where they look at how many people are linking to your page and what kind of pages you link to out of it, right? So here we address that by giving you specific recommendations on what you should link to and how you should be linked to. In fact, the rest of this section down here actually covers how to make your content to be likely linked to by authoritative sites. But we can't really control that directly, which is why we have to focus on the quality of our article to make that happen. But we can control these two things directly, which is why I put them in the section about how you write your content. So the first thing is you need to link to 2 or 3 and more if it makes sense, but at least 2 or 3 previous blog posts. And I've seen this work wonders with specific websites. For instance, I know of a site where a post was ranking 6 on Google, of the top 10 on the first page. It was ranking number 6. And all the person did is go in and find other articles that they've written and link back to this article where it's relevant, right? So if the person wants more information or you're talking about something quickly that they might not be able to cover fully in the article, and it makes sense, you link back to the full article on it, or article you've written, and that alone propelled their website or that page from 6 to 1, right? That's huge. That's basically getting no clicks or very few clicks to getting the lion's share of the people searching for that. And all they had to do was link to their own blog post. So I don't recommend necessarily that people go in and go back or plan on going back and linking all their stuff up. It's just a lot of extra work, a lot of extra time that we don't have in this intensive. So the best way is to, as you're writing or before you publish a post, make sure you go back and link other articles that are relevant to it. Right? Now, sometimes you're writing about a newer topic, you haven't really covered anything related, in which case you might need to make a note. And when you're writing a new post, go back and link to it later. But as much as possible, in the course of writing, put in those relevant, what they call inner site links or interlinking in your site itself, because that's just a freebie. If you do it, you get higher ranking. It just works. The next thing is linking out. Now, a lot of people recommend or not recommend, but ask me, should you cite your sources? What should we be linking out to? And this is what I personally recommend when I use. Google is a pattern matching engine. That's what it does. It doesn't know how good your article is. It looks at signs that your article is well researched, is a good resource for the people that are searching, right? And we mentioned it does that by how many people link to you. It does that by how long people spend on your site, whether they search for the same thing again. And another thing they look at is what you're linking to, right? And so professional, well-written websites tend to link to authoritative sources. And an easy way to do this is find.edu, find.gov websites with information. And so don't link to Joe's blog, link to these actual resources. So if you find some information in somebody else's blog when you're doing research or in some other random website, look for where they cite their sources. If they don't cite it, I wouldn't even use it because you don't know where they got that from, unless it's something where they researched themselves, where they did an experiment or where they did a survey of their own people, and that would be fine. But you want to try to find the primary source and link to it because Google associates that with an authoritative research or resource. Another thing you can do is actually link to, if it's not necessarily .edu, .gov, but it's, a very authoritative scholarly source like journal articles or, any kind of scientific resource like that, that would be another good place to link. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily link to it. If it's a piece of information that you're using that could be considered common knowledge in your field, then I wouldn't link to it. You may want to link to also books on Amazon. If there's a book about it, you can link to the Amazon link, and we can actually use that to monetize later. So now we're trying to, in the linkable content section here, I'm going to go over ways that we can write the article to make it, one, the best resource available for the topic that you're writing about, and two, to make it likely that other sites are going to link to you. And so, in fact, the article I've been showing you, this article was linked to by a number of different sources, actually, hundreds at this point, and one of them was a news site that was aggregated on Google's news service. And I think Dave showed you in a previous lesson how to get an alert in your email inbox of the top news sites for specific topics. So I have that coming into my inbox for off-grid because one of my sites is an off-grid related site, homesteading, sustainable living, that kind of stuff. And lo and behold, my name was in the snippet, in the little description text, because they had linked to my article. And so they're giving me kudos. They're increasing my expertise ranking on the internet and among people reading their sources by linking to me. And why do they link to me? Well, because this article provides information that you cannot find on any other web pages about this, right? It's a unique resource. So how do we make it something like that to where you're going to get newspapers and other authoritative websites linking to you? One, you don't want to just copy what the 3 to 5 search results information is. That's already out there, right? You're not any different or better than the other search results. So doing a search for the topic you're talking about and reading through and skimming and see what they say, that's useful. But you want to find something that you can add to it that's unique to you. So here's some ideas that you can use to add something that's not just the first result on Google. One, and I really love this one a lot, and it's super easy, and I recommended in a previous lesson that you go on Facebook and join all the groups related to your topic that you can. This is one area where that comes into play. What you do is if you are trying to figure out an answer, like let's say back to the meditation one, let's say you want to know what's the best meditation for beginners. Well, if you go to a meditation group, a lot of groups allow you to post polls, and you can just post a poll that says what recommendation or what would you recommend for a beginner in terms of meditation, or what meditation did you start out with as a beginner, that kind of poll, right? And then you wait for a day or two, come back, and you'll have statistics there. 65% of people started with insight meditation. 22% of people started with guided meditation, whatever it is, and that's data you can just stick in your blog post. So if your blog post is best meditation for beginners, in the answer you can say 65% of experienced meditators recommend this. Right? Now that's something nobody else has, and it really didn't take you any time or effort to do it. Right? Just a single post. It takes less than 5 minutes to put something like that up. Another thing you can do easily is expert testimony. Right? So many of you are experts in a way in your field, and you know other people that you can call or talk to, right? And all it takes sometimes is just a quick phone call to, your mentor or to somebody that you know in the field and be like, hey, I was just wondering, what do you think about this? And a lot of experts will be willing to just tell you, like they love to be asked for that kind of information. You say, hey, do you mind if I, quote you a little bit in the blog? No big deal. Even if you don't know somebody, there's tons of experts in the field around that have, that have private practices nearby, or they have, run a store, or they run an online store, all with phone numbers that you can call. So let's say you're writing an article about healing animals, say. You could call a veterinarian and ask them a couple specific questions. And a lot of times, if you just say, hey, I want to ask you this real quick, and then your question, a lot of times they'll just answer you quickly. And then now imagine you call like 10 veterinarians over the course of like 20 minutes, right? And just say, hey, can you answer me this? Now you have a pool of experts, and that's super valuable. But even if you don't have time for that, just one, my veterinarian recommends blank. That is unique information that you don't often find in a lot of other articles on the web. Now, this technique is the one I use for my article here, and it's aggregating data, right? So I have tons of data in this blog, and that's why people love it. And all I did was I went and found statistics on other websites, right? So property taxes by state, cost of land by state. I got that from the USDA. Cost of living index. These are all just, there's tons of websites with just a list of states and cost of living index. So I copy pasted that out into an Excel document, correlated them all by the name of the state, and now I have a full score for everybody. And this article was fairly involved to do, but it didn't take more than a morning. And the amount of return I've gotten off it's just been absolutely amazing. Right? And I didn't have to call anybody or find any new information. I made new information by correlating different statistics together, freely available statistics, usually from government websites or authoritative websites if possible. So now we're mixing in multiple different techniques. Another thing you can do, and I've done a lot, especially with like self-help type topics or dealing with difficult people, that kind of stuff. I found stories of people in similar situations, and if you have a client or know somebody that's willing to give you a story or that you can speak about, either anonymously or not, that's fine. But if you don't, it's easy to go onto, again, Facebook groups. There's tons of groups related to people, not related to people, but where the main topic of discussion is people especially answering questions or giving snippets of their life and asking for advice. So you can pull some of those, and I don't use their full name or anything like that, and make sure that the group's rules don't specify that the group is private. But even now, Facebook is changing to where there's no such thing as a fully private group. Anybody can read it. So by posting something on Facebook, you've implicitly made it public knowledge, even in a private group now. So, take pains to ensure people's privacy. You don't want to ruin that. But even if you just paraphrase what they're talking about, that's a great way to bring in new information. Or you can scroll through 10 or 15 different stories and say, out of 15 people dealing with a narcissist, for example, 5 of them said this, 7 of them said this, 8 of them said this. That's awesome. Another place to look for stories is Quora. If you look on Quora, which is like a question and answer type, so you can post a question and people can answer it, there's lots of personal stories on there, and they have zero, right to privacy there. So all you can do is you can quote, put it in a block quote, a chunk of what they wrote that's relevant to what you're writing about, and it's just fills out. It's a lot better, a lot more engaging than just stating information, right? You can actually back up what you're talking about with a story, and that really engages people. Also, other people's blogs. If you look in a search term and maybe go to page 3 or 4 or 5 of the results, where most people never go, you're going to find just random people's blogs, perfectly public, that again, a lot of them are just stories about their life. They're not writing for SEO, they're not writing to engage an audience, they're just writing for themselves, and they made it public. So you can copy snippets of what they've written, quote it, and I would cite it, say I got this from so-and-so. I wouldn't necessarily link to their blog, but adequately cite the source, or just cut off the name and put the first name. And that's a way that you can get stories without having to do much work. And lastly, a great thing you can do if it's relevant to what you're doing is actually experiment on this stuff yourself. If you're talking about a diet, do it for 10 days or something like that in preparation for writing the blog post and describe your experience. If you are talking about, best oils for blank, go buy some of the oils, right? It's a business expense for one, so you can write it off. It's probably something that you like to have, or maybe you already have some, and it shows people that you're so much more authoritative. You can, in the first paragraph of your blog, say, I want to know what the best oil is, so I bought 15 of them, and here we go. That really gets people excited. And lastly, for making linkable content is adding tables, charts, and explanatory graphics as much as possible. So just try to condense the information into as useful of a resource as you possibly can. Now, what type of thing makes sense depending on what you're writing about? For instance, in this article, I did a lot of tables because that's comparing a lot of stuff. I got maps that were, Creative Commons or government provided maps which don't have which are publicly available information, and put them on here, so that people could see some color and actually get a feel for what I'm talking about as far as, like how much solar power is available per state. Well, colored map is great. Now, you might not have necessarily as technical of a topic as this, but it still makes sense to say you're talking about the stages of abuse, right? Why not have a circle graphic with the 5 stages arranged in a circle, and it just shows diagrammatically what you're talking about? That's something that anybody can easily do using something like Canva, which we're going to describe quite a bit later in this course. But if you have any experience at all, even using Word or any art package like Photoshop, those are very quick and simple to make. Also, infographics are good. Those things work very well on Pinterest. So infographics are like more detailed graphical descriptions of different things that you're doing. In fact, on St. Paul's Free University YouTube channel, you can search for making infographics with Canva, and I actually have a full tutorial on how to do that there, if that's something that would benefit your article. Charts is another thing. So let's say you're doing a poll on Facebook, like I mentioned. You can throw that in Excel real quick, make a pie chart or make a bar chart and export that. It takes like 2 minutes, and now you have a unique graphic that you don't have to worry about because it's yours, right? So you're not going to violate anybody's copyright. And you can throw it on there, and it really adds an air of knowing what you're talking about to a blog post. So now that concludes what I consider to be the most important elements of an effective post. I'm going to finish off this lesson with just a few tips on useful resources to help you write this stuff. So one, Grammarly. I think many people have heard of this. It's like a spelling grammar check type service. And personally, at the very beginning, when I started blogging, I was kind of against it. Like I know better than most of these tools how to use proper English grammar. I don't really want to have to deal with that kind of thing. But I found that as you speed up, it's very easy to make simple spelling mistakes or use a correctly spelled word, but incorrectly in the sentence. Different there's the wrong twos. And it's not because you don't know, but because you're typing quickly. We got to be efficient with this stuff. We don't have lots of time to mess around. So I found that installing the free Grammarly plugin has been super helpful to allow me to write more quickly, make some silly errors and have the thing just fix it. It saves you time in editing, it saves you time in writing. And so if you're not getting the full speed out of your writing experience, then I would consider Grammarly to be basically essential at this point. You're giving yourself an unneeded handicap if you're not using something like this to at least to get your text in a reasonable form. And Google does check on spelling and grammar. If you're having a lot of misspellings, a lot of grammar errors, your site will get dinged for that because it makes you look unauthoritative. So Grammarly can help you fix that. Another thing is Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a Google search engine that only looks at journals, basically, or scientific stuff. So let's say, narcissistic CEO %, right? If a lot of people would just search Google for this and they'd find like a Forbes magazine that says some statistic about, narcissistic CEO. But what you can do instead is come to a place like this and you actually get real journal articles that have that information in there. And so one, if you find an article that you like, you can click into here and go into the actual journal's website, if this one loads, right, like this. And so this is a great page to link to, right? When you're giving reference of where you got the statistic, link to the journal article site. This is a .org, not a .edu or whatever, but this is still a very authoritative website and it's good to link to. Now, most of them, like if you see, let me go back to this one. This one, I believe, does not let you read it, right? So it's asking you to pay. And these journal articles are not cheap. So that's not the way I would recommend it to do it. And there's two ways to get around this. The easy one I'll show you in a second, but the hard one requires that you find something called a DOI. Almost every article journal is going to actually have something like this. So https://doi.org and then a bunch of numbers, right? So first let's copy that and have that for later. Now we'll go back to Google Scholar. If you notice on the right here, there's actually a link that says PDF. Now most journal articles are distributed in PDF. So if we click on that, it's actually going to open up the real PDF of the article. So Google helped us out quite a bit there. Now we can read the whole thing. We don't have to pay $60 or whatever it is, and we can pull out our statistics. Now, if you're not somebody that's familiar with reading scientific articles, usually what you want to do is start by reading the abstract. If there is one, there might be an introduction depending on which journal style they're using. Hard sciences and soft sciences have different standards that they use. And then you want to go down and read the conclusions or the results. So here's the citation, so it should be before that. Scrolling up, scrolling up. And also, these are other interesting articles to check out too, usually, if you didn't get the information you want. So here's the conclusion. So usually the most important statistics or quotable segments are generally in those two. And you can just skim through, read the first paragraph, read the last paragraph, and see if this is something you want. Excuse me. So let's say you didn't have a PDF link there. Not everything does. If you go back to the blog writing tools, the next thing I link down here is Sci-Hub. And Sci-Hub is a way to get into those articles that don't necessarily have a PDF on Google Scholar. And all you do is take that DOI that I had you copy earlier, paste it into here, and click open. And 99% of the time, it's going to just show you the PDF. So it's loading. Yeah, so there's the PDF. So that's another way that you can get that. And if you want to keep it on your computer, for later, you can just click download and have it there forever. So those are very, very useful tools for getting authoritative references to put in your blog that isn't just the same old, top 5 of Google stuff. Now, throughout the whole this whole lesson, I've been talking about word counts, character counts. How do you deal with that? Well, there are a number of plugins that you can use. For instance, I have this plugin I installed where it just shows you when you highlight it. Now, there's a lot of different browsers and there's a lot of different plugins, so I found that was a little difficult to recommend to people. If you're somebody that's tech savvy and you know how to install a plugin or extension for your browser, just search for word count, and most of them will have character count as well in it, and you can just do that. But if you're not somebody who's tech savvy, I recommend you go to this word counter website here. So I open that up, and it's loading. And it actually pre-filled in with what I had before, but when you come to it here, it'll just start like this. So if you're looking at somebody else's blog and you want to know, how many words is this snippet, you can just copy paste it into here, right? And now it shows you 37 words, 239 characters. So if you're writing an answer target, it's often beneficial just to come in here and start typing. So my answer is this, 21 characters. And the Grammarly plugin I recommended is already doing its checks on this. So if I misspell this, right, it's doing the checks. Do it. There we go. It found the error, and if I highlight over it or hover over it, it recommends a suggestion, and there it is. So you could, when you're writing answer targets, you just open this website, type it out, see exactly how many characters you have left if you're in the range. When you get in the range, you'll have a bunch of underlines if you're careless like me, and you just hover over and click them. Hover over, click the one that you think is the right way to correct it, copy paste this back out, and you're good to go. So that's a very powerful tool to have. And lastly, I have a bunch of resources here for different ways to get stock images, videos, and music. Now, I highly recommend when you're choosing this stuff to put on your website, you do not just search on Google or search on Google Image or any of the other search engines and pick whatever the top thing is, because there's people out there who go and there's kind of scams that get involved where they will try to extort people for money because you're using a copyrighted image. And as a beginner blogger, you're just starting out, small blogs, that a lot of people use that stuff and they don't get hit because there's nothing to take. But we're pushing our sites to be, profitable, bring in clients, right? So once you have something going there, you're more likely to be the target of this. And so I just want to start everybody right from the beginning. The safest thing to do is to use non-copyright or royalty-free, attribution-free, I guess I should say. Everything's copyrighted, but you need to have permission to use it. So I've listed a bunch of sites here that have royalty-free images that are attribution-free: Pixabay, Pexels, Unsplash. Those are all great resources. Now, another thing you could even do is actually pay for one of the stock photo services. That's actually what I do. There's a number of them. You can choose whichever one you like. But if you're willing to, put 10 or 15 bucks towards this, you usually get a better selection of images. And the fact that you've paid for it even doubles your protection, because let's say, some copyright image that's not supposed to makes its way onto Unsplash, right? If you use it for free, so you have no recourse if something were to happen. Now, you do have a good alibi, right? You intended and you thought it was royalty free, but that doesn't always cut the mustard. So if you want double protection, if you pay for an image and somebody told you it was royalty free, right? If something happened to not be royalty free and somebody comes at you, you could say, hey, that's not my deal. I paid for it. You need to go after the person who sold it to me. So that's also another option. Okay, so for this week, I highly recommend that you print out this list above and start trying to use it as much as you can, right? It takes practice to get this really down, and there's a lot to it, I know, but once you start internalizing it, you'll write a 500 or 1,000 word article without having to think about any of it. But you need to put a week or two of focus into this to make it work. So I recommend for this week, try to make your 500 word blog posts. So you should have 14 by now, so now we're moving up to 21. So from 14 to 21, try to follow this outline as closely as you can. And we recommend this week, choose your best article from this week, go on the Facebook group and post it. We already have a heading there that you can post it under and say, hey, what do you think of this? Right? And so there's two reasons why we recommend you do this. One, you can get feedback from me and Dave and from all the other students about ways that we can think that you can improve, right? We're going to think of stuff maybe you didn't see in the moment we were writing it. Like, how about you try this kind of question or this kind of poll, or wouldn't it be nice if there's a graphic there, stuff like that. That is a really great way to accelerate your learning and make it so you're writing professional level traffic driving blog posts from day one, right, as quickly as possible. We don't want to be proficient at this 2 months from now. We want to be proficient at it now, so we can start getting the results as soon as is realistic with the technology. The other thing is we recommend that everybody check it periodically and read everybody else's posts, because sometimes when you get into writing something and it takes some time to distance yourself, and so it's hard for us to judge our own work. But by going in and taking the time to really review and judge other people's works, when you start writing again, you're going to start noticing, like, oh, I'm doing the same mistake that that other article did, that the other student that's in this course did, and we can recognize that in ourselves. Right? It's so much clearer and easier to see other people's failings than it is to see our own. And it's not necessarily failing. We're beginners. We're learning. So by reviewing other people's, try to review at least one, but I would recommend, if you have time, review and give constructive criticism to everybody that posts. And the goal with this criticism, or I guess I shouldn't say criticism, some people are sensitive to that, but review it and from the angle of how could this be even better, right? We're not judging the work. We're not saying this is good or bad. We're saying, what's the next thing that could take it up one level? And if you start to practice that when you're looking at the other students' work, and you start to practice that on your own blog, that's how you get to be very, very good. Every time you write, you should think, how can I make this just one step better? And by the end of this, you're going to be so good at writing traffic driving articles, it'll blow your mind. You'll read something from week 1 or week 2, and you'll read something you wrote the day before and go, I did not know what I was doing. So I hope this helps everybody. Honestly, this is a $10,000 worth of content here. At least this alone is driven as the core of this information of so many online businesses, people making millions in just SEO traffic. There's a whole industry of people that only live off websites bringing traffic to them. So I hope you value it, and I hope you're able to put it in practice. And of course, we're always here to help you guys through the Facebook group if you have any questions.